Hello everybody, this is Rita the Shadow. Welcome. So before we move on to the next topic, so it just occurred to me like I haven't introduced what CPT really is about actually. Like I think I kind of tried to explain in my other introduction video, but I feel like maybe having something to describe it a little bit better might help someone who is new to the channel. And Harry Morel from the cognitive personality theory, CPT. He just recently released a video, and I will link that video to this video. But yeah, essentially, this notes is like essentially based on what he said in the other video and some other insights combined together to make an introduction of CPT. So yeah, and before anyone wonder, of course I have asked for permission from Harry to use his content on my channel. That's what I always do before I use someone's content extensively. I ask for permission. So yeah. Okay, so now that we got all that out of the way, what is CPT? Well, CPT is a more mechanistic approach to Jungian typology. Like it is still a Jungian theory because it is based on Carl Jung's idea of introversion, extroversion, the unconscious, and all that. And also, there are the cognitive functions that everybody in the Jungian circle are aware of. But in CPT, these cognitive functions are combined in pairs, as we said previously. And so, but in CPT, the difference is there's the concept of convergence and divergence. And because it is understood that there's difference between when the function pair is being used convergently versus using divergently, and that difference is big enough to consider them as totally separate categories. So, it's the same 16 combos, but you just times 2 because it means two different things when they're in a different position and they are paired up with another. So convergent is always paired up with a divergent pair and vice versa. And so the categories are only representations, and that also means the types are also metaphors. So it means that, the types are not defining who you are, but it's merely a representation of what your internal process may look like. See, the keyword is may look like. And so yeah, and also the cognitive functions and everything, basically they lies as a spectrum across time. And so the cognitive functions are in a spectrum across time, and the types are therefore also in a spectrum across time. And so the next part is, so you have the categories, right? And the categories, they are concepts, and the concepts are for the lack of better word, conceptual. So they're not physical things that you can observe. But if you know, you can observe someone over time, you know, observe the things that they do and the things they prefer or how they prefer to think, and you can collect those data over time. So eventually this data, you know, so you collect a lot of granular data across time because the cognition moves, or like in neuroscience, like the mind jumps from one place to another rather quickly. So, you know, the idea is to try to capture all those little movements, to capture those granular movements, and you observe them. And then the more you observe, the more you are getting close to the concept of the categories. So hopefully that, if that doesn't make sense, it's okay. We will explain more later. And the categories are nothing but these things. So the 32 cognitive functions are also known as the categories, or you can also refer them in more generically as networks, or even more blah blah blah, generically as types. So yeah, so that means in your mind could be jumping from one type to another in your mind. So that's why, you know, so actually the four sides of the mind theory, you know, has a leg to stand on in that sense, but it's just that I think it didn't go far enough. So in CPT, there's more detailed observations available that you can try to capture the movement across time, and then you have an idea what it's about. So before we explain what is F, basically you try to understand the concept of push and pull. So for any given networks, so if you don't understand networks, you can consider them as types for now, or the side of mind for now. Like given any side of mind, it might be attracted or repelled at any given time, or just any type. You know, you can think about any type. Are you attracted or repelled to use the functions in the way that type might use it? So at any given time. So then you collect the number of push and pull across time to find the attractor versus repellers. So the attractors are the ones that, of course, pulls you towards it, like the networks you prefer to use more often, and the repellers are the ones, like for some reason you just hate it, like your mind doesn't like to go in that direction. So those are the repellers. So the networks with the highest attractors are are likely to be the preferred networks. So what that means is you look for the global attractors because you have maybe you have a graph like this. So you look for the one that tend to tend to attract the type towards the most, essentially. And the highest frequency in pull, otherwise you can understood the global attractor as, because the more you attract, like I think there are different ways to approach this, but the simplest way is like every time you see someone use a network, then you add a counter like +1. Oh, you use INFP again, so the counter INFP +1. Or now you are using, I don't know, ENFJ, and ENFJ +1, and then you compare which number you get the highest in the end, across the length of time, right? So the one with the highest number in pool, like the one with the highest frequency, is could be your type. Like it's not guaranteed because depends on how much time you have taken to measure this, and the accuracy is very dependent on the samples. So if you are, and we can be influenced by a lot of other outside stimuli that can affect how we use the networks. So ideally, you want to measure it across a more longer time period, and also try to reflect on how you were doing in the past, or what you have been doing all this time. Like, but because it's in the past, so sometimes that memory can be distorted by how you are feeling in the moment. So that's why typing people can be very tricky. But given if you have an accurate reflection of the past, and then you communicate authentically with your typologist or to yourself that, okay, this is how I have been doing in the past, then you might have a higher chance to identify the global attractor more accurately, and thus you can have a more accurate typing result. So yeah, so it also requires you to not insert your personal bias about the network. I mean, it might be like so unconscious you can't help it, but try not to do it as much as possible. Like, try to view each network as by themselves. Then you have a higher chance of getting the right one that suits your combination. So yeah, so that is explaining the push and pull, and then we have given what CPT is about in the most top level sense. And now we can talk a little bit about the space in between. So the functions are like in the spectrum. So what that means is there is a various degree of intuition and sensing preference, and no one is, or not normally, is less likely to be on the extreme side of one end versus the other. And you can So you might have a preference over on one end or the other, but you can still use both in a various degree, depends on your personal preference. Like maybe you like to stay here more, but that doesn't mean you can't come here at all. Just once you come here, then you come back quickly, something like that. So yeah, here already said individual presence are more mild than extreme, and things happening in high frequency, the frequency of oscillating in between the brain networks are very fast. And so yeah, so we can keep, so these things, you have to keep in mind it happens in a minute sense, and most people are in the spectrum, in the space between, that means. So let's use sensing versus intuition, for example. Sensing in the CPT sense is nothing but a more focused perception, whereas intuition are more unfocused perception. So because all the functions in CPT are in a pair, one perceiving and one judging function, and for use the NET as an example, NET is more about exploration, and they are of more soft and impressionistic nature. And here is just using the V as an analogy, like NET is more wider than SET in terms of perception sense. STE is much more focused, and it's a much more hard and semantic basis. But that doesn't mean that if you have SAT, your vision is always like this. Like, of course, you will also do this and bounce in between, but this one comes more naturally for you to first focus more, and then you go outwards, and then you go inwards, and then you go outwards again. But most of the time you like to look at this way, whereas NETE, same thing, they will go inwards and then go outwards and then go inwards, like goes like this, but then still the longer period of time will be staying in more of in a wider angle, if not this way. So yeah, so that means it's likely that we are somewhere in between these ones. And using NETE and NITI as an example, and the orange one is dipping into the opposite orientation. And if you are somewhere in the middle of NE and NI, or in any between NE and NEI, then you are more likely to be an ambivert. That means so yeah. And let's next use sensing and intuition example. So, and by the way, the introverted sensing and introverted intuition difference being introverted sensing is more precision based, and introverted intuition is more about generality. So yeah, so it's kind of like this one, but this one is more about perceiving the external environment based, and this one is about perceiving and looking inside your mind. So that means SI is more precisely looking into a specific portion of mind, like portion of memory, a fragment of memory. And whereas NI is more generic, I would say, or more fuzzy and more blurry, more impressionistic, but in a wider area. So it's like a vibe of remembering something. Like you kind of have a sense of remembering it, but you can't recall it. You can't describe the details, but you kind of know that might be something NI related, or unconscious, could be unconscious introverted intuition, or it could be a lot of things actually, but that's one possibility. So yeah, and if you go from one end of the perceiving spectrum to the other, then it's called an extension, and in the middle of the extension is called extension dipping. So yeah, so NITI, because NITI is here, SITI is here. So SITI is more deterministic. The reason is because SI is so precise, and when it's connected to a thinking, like internalized thinking, then it becomes, oh, I know exactly what I have to do. And whereas NITI is more, I have a general idea of what I should do, so it's more probabilistic based. And so yeah, so that means, and this is comparing the difference between convergent versus divergent. So divergent one is something that you take action on, and the convergent one is more conceptual, that you use to understand something. So, but we will come back to this later when we talk about the convergent versus divergent and the various other function pairings. And the next is the axes. So apart from orientation and extension, there's another way of the function can move to another function that is called the axis. So the axis is when the function rotate on this axis to its complete opposite. So not only it is opposite in terms of the intuition and sensing continuum, it is also opposite in terms of introvert versus extrovert. So same thing here. So thinking, feeling, and introvert, extrovert. So when you do that, you are rotating on your axis, and the people who are like in the middle between this one and this one, like it means that they can use this one convergently also, and can use this one divergently, as well as they can use it convergently. So then convergent and divergent for them looks very similar. then in that case, those kind of people are called an omnivore. So right away, you can see like this means there's a lot of ways that people can use their functions different from other people. So whereas one person may have this kind of preference, another person may have this kind of preference, another person have this kind of preference, or yet another person may have this preference plus one other options, like maybe this one or this one also. So it means that even though they may have, even if they have one of them as the most likely native network, or the one that has the highest frequency, it still means that it still doesn't mean like they will be using that network the same way as another person of the same native network might use their own network. So there's a lot of variability, and right away you can see why types are not what we think they are. They are just a metaphor to describe the different process that you might use. So yeah, and various labels are just an idea to help us understand what those means. So as a final word before closing this introduction, CPT type is a process, not a label. And it is about tendency, and it's not about absolute. It's another layer or another level of cognitive function. So, if a cognitive function is a spectrum, the type is also a spectrum. So they're just another level. And also they are not fixed and static categories. So what that means for you is that it's a tool to understand your own process and to understand other people's process that they have right now or in the past, or even what they want to have in the future, right? So therefore it is not a limit to say if I am XYZ type, then I cannot do XYZ things. It is, it's not a limit to your potential. That means. So yeah. So that's all for now. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye.